Steve Bryant here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the metronome. If you need to reach me with any kind of questions or any kind of input, comments you have with what we're doing here, you could reach me through the Bass Frontiers magazine. And I would appreciate those comments, by the way, because what we're trying to do is present workable solutions, things that you can, again, use as a foundational technique for your own bass adventures, if you will. And I've talked about doing daily practice, repetitions, and mother of skill, including saying this a few times. How's that for repetition? When would you practice? What's the best time to practice? Well, the best time to practice, it's a personal thing. You want to maintain a practice schedule. Hopefully you'll do this daily, especially as we get into the meat of the situation. You want to do that at times when your brain is really, when you're awake. I don't necessarily mean in the morning. Maybe you're working on a different shift, that kind of thing. But you want to have something where you're minimizing interruptions, where you're talking about, where I'm talking about, no phone calls, nobody's interrupting you. Guard that time when you're working on your beginning technique. Or for you more advanced players, working on some of these things that we're talking about here. You know, when you're working a lot of gigs sometimes, and I certainly had my share of them, sometimes I'd see bands where the bass players were the best musicians in the band. I've seen some where the trumpet player would be the best musician in the band. The drummers were the best musician in the band. But doing a lot of one-nighters, and I'm certainly a product of my environment of doing so much live things. I came up playing live, I mean, tons of gigs for years and doing all kinds of different things. Many times I would run into drummers who varied in degrees of competency, and I would always run back to the metronome and use this this metronome, this thing of using the metronome on 2 and 4 to help correct your time habits. Because if you're playing with a bad drummer, I don't mean he's got bad breath or he's a bad personality or anything of that situation, but he might rush his fills, for example, or the way he plays a slow shuffle is not quite together. And I tell you can really work your keystro off at times when you're playing with a drummer that either drags or pulls forward. And there's definitely a time concept that you'll become more aware of using the metronome of 2 and 4. Check it out. Conceptually, you'll have players, and none of these are unmusical, mind you, but there is a way of producing some kind of continuity with your groove that denotes that you're a good player. You can play on top of the beat, and some drummers will do that, and that's cool. You'll hear that with really hard driving eighth notes, for example. There'll be some drummers that'll play back a little bit from the beat, and you'll hear that in guys that are doing like the Stax Motown thing, maybe. That sort of thing. And then there's guys that play a little bit ahead of the beat, and you can hear that maybe in some Latin things, perhaps. That's a very difficult music to play because it's the rhythm spacing. That kind of a groove is wonderful when it's played correctly. Those are all fine, but this situation where you're playing with drummers where, let's say, their feels, their actual feels that they're playing are rushing you or dragging you. When you have a drummer doing that, you just want to be able to play those long notes I was telling you about and just hang on for dear life. But, you know, it can be the other side of the coin, too. You could be pushing ahead. You could be pulling back. If you do these things, 2 and 4, that'll minimize that, I promise you, but it's consistency of working. So this is very important to do. When we talk about using a metronome, here it is on 2 and 4 again. Again, we're on 98. There's our quarter notes. And, of course, when we're talking about a triplet feel, shuffle feel, dig where I'm coming from? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's again, that is the use of first playing long notes. Notice playing the shuffle. What I did, I made contact with the string, merely muted by lifting up. talk about these shuffles, and we'll get into particular things about rhythm as we go on. Now, what would you practice with a metronome? Voila! I'm going to show you, and we'll start getting into a little bit of chord work. Now, sometimes you'll see bass players, they'll be scared to death about knowing what notes are in a chord. And they really make it complicated, especially when you're hearing some things like playing a scale over a chord. And really, and I'm not talking about, chords like that, although those can be very musical. Something like that can be really cool when you're doing that. But we're talking about what chord is being played when you're nailing the A. And a lot of people will learn a scale, and there's nothing wrong with scales. I don't mean to criminalize scales or make them illegal or anything, but you're not playing scales on the gig, you're playing chords. And let's talk a little bit about that, about how we can use that. And just take this example where we're playing this groove. If I played this chord, by the way, is an A minor 7. We'll talk about the fingering and all that kind of stuff later on. But if you think of a scale, you intermediate and advanced players, hang with me on this. You kind of know this stuff, but then I might just throw you a little bit of curve, and we'll try to turn this into real world knowledge. And one of the first things you learn, you get into scales thinking, well, this is going to show me how to play. Well, you can learn what notes are in that scale, and it has some value of finding it. But again, where I'm coming from is information you're going to actually use on the gig. And again, I haven't been hired to play a scale. That doesn't sound real good. You're playing kind of like a basic little funky groove. Just something like that. But if you're sitting around going, or the full scale, Dorian minor scale, that gets a little old. It sounds very exercising. And no, what you're doing is that you're using notes in the scale. So let's back up just a little bit, and I'm going to take you around for a tour of chords. And here's our G major scale again. Here in Nashville, we use something called a number chart, and I know the great bassist and an associate compadre and a fine president of our AFM 257, our musicians union here in town, Dave Pomeroy, did a little exposition on the number system, and this is exactly building upon what he was talking about. Major scale. We're going to dispense with the note names. No, that doesn't mean that when you're reading music, we'll talk about all that. It's not as hard as you think it is. We are dispensing with the note names G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and simply calling it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now here's the thing, and for just to simplify the purposes of where we're going, is you're going to be extracting notes out of that scale in order to get your chords. You probably know that for some of you, but if not, then hang with me, I'll show you. If you take the 1 of the scale, the 3 of the scale, the 4, the 5th of the scale, I'm so sorry, and the 8, you notice I played a total of 4 notes there. I use scale degree, notes, number, scale degree, they're all interchangeable. Scale degree 1, 3, 5, and 8. That gave us a G major chord. Now, just a basic, if you think of like a basic country walking line, just a very, like a 50s country walking line. That's less notes than, that's not going to make it on the gig. See, you're playing like a good groove. You're playing, right? 1, 3, 5, 3. And you're going to use your scale. It's not going to happen. But you know the chord there of what you want to try to achieve, the 1, 3, 5, and 8. Now, there's the minor chords. There are seventh chords. But here's what we're going to talk about. Then we'll conclude this segment. We'll get into this heavier on the next one. What you're doing is that you're going to build a chord off of each degree or note name or number. Now, this is just a quick around the block type thing, and I will take this apart in the next segment. I'm building a chord off the 1, building a chord off the second degree of the scale, which will give us a 2 minor or an A minor, building a chord off the third note of the scale. See how it works? B minor, C, D chord, E, and something you won't see too much in music. We'll get into that when we get into the theoretical section. You're playing a diminished chord back to 8. So that almost sounds melodic in itself. Check it out. You almost get a sense of finality of how that goes. Now, if you just take that basic information, you can almost make a little music out of it. Almost sounds like a little bit of a line, a lot better than. So we'll get into this in much more of the meat of the situation, but this is just a sort of warming up your mind thing. Hey, I tell you what, think of this as a cerebral laxative, and that's a good way to take this. All right, see you on the next segment.